This is Ethan Kai with Campus Reform, and today we're sitting down with Dr. Samuel Abrams from Sarah Lawrence College. Dr. Samuel Abrams has been working on research for the lack of viewpoint diversity on college campuses. He recently posted an op-ed in the New York Times about this topic, and he was met with defamation and harassment by some members of the academic community. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Abrams.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the interest.
So for our viewers who have not seen this op-ed and aren't familiar with this, could you just give a brief summary of what you found and why you decided to research this topic to begin with?
Sure. So the op-ed really had two key goals in mind. The first was to point out that when we think about colleges and universities and higher ed generally, we often think about professors, we think about our faculty, we think about what they're doing, how they're doing it. We think a lot about presidents and provosts, and we think a lot about the students, what the student life is like, what the student body looks like, what the culture of those institutions are. And I realized that there's another pillar in higher ed that we have been ignoring for years, and that is this growing class of college administrators. They're everywhere. They're in the dining halls. They are in the residence life. They're in offices of student success. They're in offices of diversity and inclusion. And I realized pretty quickly that there is a very large group of people that we don't think about, we don't consider, but they set the agenda for things like student orientation programming. They set the agenda for how things happen and how discourse and dialogue works when you're in a dining hall, when you're in a student union space, when you're in a residence hall. And I realized this is a very powerful, very influential group that we needed to shine a light on. And so that's part one. And then part two is the fact that this group is not balanced. This group is extremely progressive as a whole. And the consequence of this is that when you look at what students are doing outside of the classroom and what sort of programming they're getting, it tends to be fairly monolithic. Academy and higher education more generally is supposed to present as many viewpoints as possible and as many ideas as possible. That wasn't happening. So I wrote this piece because I needed to shine light on, again, what's going on in terms of the lack of diversity, and then shine light on the fact that there's this huge group of people that are influencing higher ed, and we need to be aware of who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, and so when you wrote this op-ed, what was the response from the academic community? Like what, did you receive? What backlash did you receive?
So first I want to say that there was an incredible outpouring of support from students, parents, and I think concerned citizens around the country. I've received literally tens of thousands of emails, letters, and notes of support in various forms saying, thank you for bringing this up. Thank you for pointing this out. We knew something was amiss. We knew something was a little wrong. We need to understand that. Thank you for, again, bringing it to our attention. Among the administrative class, it's been silent. I've actually waited and continue to wait for a response from these various associations of administrators. I'm waiting for them to attempt to refute the claims, bring data to the table. That has not happened. At Sarah Lawrence, the reaction among my colleagues has been terrible. Most of my colleagues would prefer to see me disappear and be silenced rather than continue to talk about this.
Yeah, and your office door was also vandalized, and there were students who wrote a letter of complaint. What happened in those regards?
Sure. So I try not to pay too much attention to that, but since the writing of the op-ed, I have received numerous threats to my safety, my family, accusations of sexual assault. That went up around campus. There's no grounds for any of these sorts of things. Basically, as soon as students were angry and as soon as people thought that they or didn't like what I was writing, they hit the nuclear button. They basically say, we're going to try to trash this professor. We're going to make things up about my disposition, my relationship with the school, which has been fairly good over the last almost decade. And unfortunately, I think that's a fairly typical response. Rather than address the ideas and the substance of the piece, which I still await a response from the college, if they disagree with how I characterized my example at the college, tell me why. Show me why I'm wrong. Argue with me. No one's doing that. They'd rather turn and simply attack and make ad hominem attacks. Very anti-intellectual, and very, very problematic. This is not what the academy is about. And unfortunately, I think they showed the worst side of higher ed and what higher ed can be like.
Have you had any other instances where the academic community kind of pushed back and, labeled you? I heard that at the beginning of your Sarah Lawrence College, professorship, you were accused of being racist. What happened with that?
Sure. So I used a term that we use in the social sciences. I don't think we use it as much anymore. It was called the dark side of civic engagement. And it's a book that was edited by a couple of mentors of mine, published by Brookings. And basically, it talked about during the nascent era of the internet, where groups that may not be popular could coalesce around ideas and meet up on the internet. So people scattered could sort of come together and exert influence. And I used the term dark side of civic engagement, which is, again, a fairly common term in the social sciences, to talk about the sort of negative and downsides to what happens when a certain group of extremists can organize and make a lot of noise. People misunderstood the word, accused me of the dreaded racist word. And I have to tell you, as a new professor at the time, the minute someone throws that at you, your career could be over. These are very powerful accusations. They shouldn't be thrown around randomly. And unfortunately, with that instance, and then I think with the most recent op-ed, rather than addressing the substance of the comment, people immediately just look to attack and throw ideas out that don't really have merit and really shouldn't be thrown around in such a casual way.
And so regarding this issue of viewpoint diversity, do you have hope for the future? What things do you think we could change to address this issue?
So I actually am very optimistic, which is a little unusual, I think, for a professor. We tend to be fairly negative and fairly critical. I'm optimistic because since writing this piece, there has been an incredible outcry. I've been in touch with so many boards of directors around the country. I've been in touch with so many different groups around the country, from the American Council of Trustees to groups like Heterodox Academy, which has thousands of professors and other allied thinkers about this. People know we have a problem right now. People know that we are not getting enough viewpoint diversity. People know that there is a developing progressive monoculture that's limiting the free exchange of ideas and open inquiry. This is a problem. People know it. And the University of Chicago has its principles, which have been adopted around the country by many, many places. Even the University of California at Berkeley is taking significant steps to increase viewpoint diversity and to bring more people onto campus and to make sure that ideas are discussed openly and debated. That's the whole point of higher ed and why we exist to begin with. This is how ideas develop and move forward. So I think there's incredible push in a positive way for that. And it's one of those things where it's not going to happen overnight. But I think if you speak with most professors, and I've written a few articles about this, even the most progressive and conservative ones believe that there need to be multiple voices at the table. That's what we're trained to do. And, it's going to be slow. It's going to be very hard to push back against a vocal group of faculty who dislike this and administrators who feel threatened by this. But people are pushing back. I wrote a piece 2 weeks ago in Inside Higher Ed where I said, look, faculty need to be involved in conversations about what happens at orientation, what happens in residential life and residential programming, because we have to be able to say, look, this orientation is biased. This orientation is not presenting a multiplicity of ideas. The rules and ideas about how we talk in dorms and what constitutes free speech is actually limiting speech. We can do that. And there are enough faculty, I think, around the country that agree with me on this, thousands of them. And slowly and surely, I think we're seeing some progress. Claremont McKenna just announced the creation of a big program where there are always going to be two different speakers on particular salient topics, and they're going to go back and forth on that. So I'm optimistic. I think it's going to be slow. I think it's going to be painful. I think some schools like Sarah Lawrence are not going to push in the right direction on this, but I think quite a few are, and I think the marketplace will play out eventually. It's just going to take some time.
All right, Dr. Abrams, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciated our conversation, and it was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for your interest. I really appreciate it.